But I'm going to talk about one particular data collection effort that we're involved in, and Bob is actually also a co-conspirator in that, in the sense that this started in the US at least with a project that's called Internet Interviewing and the HRS, and this was really Bob's initiative to introduce internet interviewing into the health retirement study, and then it sort of partly took on a life of its own, and it started to become a separate panel. So, Alicia this morning talked about a trade show, and to some extent that's what it is. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what the panel is, and in a discussion we can then go maybe in more detail and look at more items that are more detailed interest. So I'm just going to give a fairly broad overview, and just by way of context, we collect a lot of data in a lot of different countries for a lot of different purposes. That's also true of the American Life Panel that I'll talk about, but one particular context is the work that we do on financial decision making. We have a Center for Financial and Economic Decision Making, and we have a strong interest in, and as any center would have, in better understanding how people make decisions. But we also then want to develop tools that support better decision making. So we want to develop tools that will help people make better decisions. And actually this morning there were a couple of presentations by people associated with us that use that tool. And then also it's sort of in the nature of RAND. It's actually RAND's mission to support policy making. So we do work for the federal government quite a bit. And one of the aims of our work is actually to help better policies that help people make better decisions. We work on a broad array of topics, and some of them are shown here. And they're pretty obvious if you think about portfolio choice, how to deal with risk. I'll just sort of highlight two of them. One is towards the bottom, you see the toolkit for evaluating financial capability interventions. That's actually something that we do with support from the World Bank, and it's led by Joanne Jung at RAND. And so what we're doing there, we indeed are developing a toolkit that will help researchers, policymakers who design programs to improve financial decision making or financial literacy, to help them design projects in ways that you can actually evaluate them in a proper way. So that's a really important part. And we do this partly by writing manuals, but partly by working with teams in various countries while they design the projects, and then we work with them, but that also then gives feedback, and it helps us to think about how best to structure a toolkit like that. And of course, we do indeed a number of projects in the current Financial Literacy Center. And I'll concentrate on one of the, particularly in the Financial Literacy Center, one of the tools that we have been using is indeed the American Life Panel. And so what is it? I mean, in itself, it's not all that unusual. It's a panel. Currently, it has about 3,000 respondents. I'll talk about expansion in a second. It's an internet panel, which in itself is not unique at all. There are many, many internet panels nowadays. The thing that makes it fairly unique, it's not the only one, but it's fairly unique, is that respondents are not recruited via the internet. They're recruited in different ways: telephone, writing letters, knocking on doors. And there's really only a few panels in the world that are built like this. I believe the first one of that sort was built in the Netherlands, and I was actually running that for a while, although I didn't start it. And then later on, Knowledge Networks came on the scene here in the US, and the American Life Panel sort of started at a similar time when I moved to RAND, and when Bob indeed took this initiative to work on internet interviewing in the HRS. So respondents in the panel don't have to have internet access. If they don't have it, we give them something that will help them to access the internet. We used to give them something called a web TV, which is a product that Microsoft used to produce. And nowadays we give them a laptop, and of course we give them internet access in addition to that. The current structure has been around since about 2006. We give them about 2 surveys a month, and currently we are at about 130, 140 surveys that we have done with our panel members. And the data are freely available. So if you go to the website, you can download the vast majority of the data. Sometimes there is an embargo on the data, and it takes a little while, like researchers may want to have a head start of 6 months or a year. But eventually all the data are freely available, and you can download them. You only have to sign a little paper that says that you're not going to abuse the data, but that's about it. So we're also expanding the panel. So currently it's about 3,000, but with support from the Social Security Administration, we're now expanding the panel to 5,000. And in particular, we're concentrating on vulnerable populations and on the Hispanic minority. So what we intend to have in another 3 months or so is a 5,000 member panel with a substantial representation of lower incomes and a 1,000 Spanish language sub-panel. And so by early 2011, we hope that to be operational. We're working on that right now. So, to some extent, this may be obvious. I think it's worth talking a little bit about the advantages of having internet panels. Of course, the one thing is a quick turnaround. For example, since November 2008, we do a financial crisis survey. So we follow the effects of financial crisis on American households since November 2008. First, we did quarterly interviews. Now we do monthly interviews. So every month, we ask people a number of questions about how they're doing, whether they lose their job, whether they're underwater with the house, whether they worry about something, whether they're supporting family members, etc. The other thing, due to the computerized nature of this, you can do experiments. And you can do all sorts of experiments. You can let people make decisions under uncertainty. You can do savings. We all do all of that. You can make savings experiments. You give them money. You vary the interest rate. You can introduce new products, see how they deal with the product, which products are effective, etc. And of course, an important part of doing experiments is always randomization. Of course, in a computerized environment, randomization is relatively straightforward to do. So randomization is a major tool that we use in exploiting the advantages of having computerized internet environment. So in many ways, you have an environment that's like having a lab in a university, except in a lab, usually, you use students, maybe freshmen. Here we have families all across the United States, and the sample size is much bigger, and the composition of the population is very different. And then within the panel, given that people have a screen, you can play, then you take advantage of, for example, visual representation. I'll sort of show you some examples. The other thing is feedback and preloading. It's a panel, so you can use, you can preload things I told you a year ago, things you already know about, and you don't have to repeat questions if you already know the background, you already know something about how much money they have, you don't have to repeat questions each time that you want to do a new project. And feedback, maybe that can go two ways. I mean, they can always write to us as part of the survey about what they see, what they don't like. There are open answers are possible. On the other hand, we can also go back to them. It can either be automated, so if they give an answer that seems implausible, we can immediately ask a question. But there's something going on, we can also easily go back and send them an email or do something else in order to, for example, repair errors that that the respondents may have made, or errors that were actually induced by things that we did. So, so as I said, we have something like 130, 140 surveys by now. So as you may imagine, the number of topics that we have covered is a little hard to describe in my remaining, I don't know how many minutes. But I highlighted one there, which is we have actually by now administered a complete HRS instrument. And many of you will be familiar with the Health and Retirement Study, and of course it contains a wealth of information about people's financial, material well-being, their health, we also have a lot of information about cognitive functioning, as Bob alluded to. So that's a very important set of background data that we have that you can then use whenever you use the panel for any other experiment. So just a couple of screenshots of what questions look like. Of course, we do ask a lot of plain vanilla direct questions, but often it sort of helps to sort of support people with some visual display. So this is an example where people asked about the probability that they will have a car accident next year. And this is really a training question for follow-up questions about uncertain events. So here there's a slider, and they can just move the slider, and it's a way of visualizing probabilities. This is a slightly more complicated example where people are asked about the probable date of retirement, and now they're invited essentially to construct a subjective distribution of their future retirement date. So you see these balls, and they can put the balls in the various bins, and then of course the way the balls are put in the bins represents their subjective uncertainty. And it's an example where the visual display really helps in getting across certain concepts that otherwise are really hard to communicate. Like over the phone, this would just be extremely difficult to do. This is if people don't believe numbers. You can actually show them how people draw balls from a ball. So this is an example. It's actually it's animated. So there is a number of yellow balls and red balls, and you see how many balls there are, and you see someone cover it with a towel, and then they grab in the ball, and they either pull a yellow or a red ball. It's just to sort of visualize the notion of randomization in cases where you ask them to make decisions under uncertainty, for example. We use videos, and this morning, Eileen Heinberg gave a presentation where she she showed the same screenshot. So what we have done in one of the projects for the Financial Literacy Center is that we have given people instructional videos, and then so we tested their financial knowledge like a few months before, then we gave them instructional videos, and then we gave them the same quiz after the videos and looked at the differences. And of course, there was a control group that didn't get anything, so you can do diff and diff. And we're going to repeat that. So in a couple of months, we're going to go back to these people again and see whether, whether they still remember, whether they still learn something, or whether all the knowledge sort of disappeared at some point. And we do different things. We also do things, for example, to look at the efficacy of certain medical procedures, like knee replacement. People can decide whether or not a knee replacement is a good idea. So we're currently doing a project where people are shown sort of different testimonies, different ways of presenting, and then see how people respond to the way information is provided. So it's not just in the financial sphere, it can also be in the medical sphere, and pretty much in any other domain of human life. So, and this is one that was also actually demonstrated this morning in a different paper. So this is an example where people are they're explained information about the effect of the age of Social Security claiming on the level of benefits. You see a slider there, so they can move the slider bar. And if the slider bar moves, then at the bottom you see that their monthly benefits. Then the amount of monthly benefits will change. It will also change the age, and it will change the month. So that's another one where you can visualize the effect of choices, and people can just play with it, and at some point they stop, and then that's the answer, their answer to the question. So, so that's really the environment in which we do this. And currently we have about 3,000 panel members, as I said, and we're going to go up to about 5,000. So finally, I want to say a little bit about how the data are being made available, and I think that then I'm sort of done for now. So you see a URL at the top. So it's a website, and I'll show you a screenshot in a second, where you have a list of all the various surveys we've done. And of course, at some point, it becomes really difficult to sort of go through all the surveys. So there's a Google-like search facility. You want to know all the questions that ever asked about early claiming or ever asked about cancer. You can just look for it, and it will just give you all the surveys in which these questions came up. One of the nice things I find is that if you're a researcher and you want to do a project and you have designed a survey and there's programs in the field, you can look at the data in real time. And sometimes that's useful, because sometimes you make a mistake. So it goes in the field, and a day later you look, and there's a few hundred observations. You can actually download the data at any time and sort of see whether it looks right. And I have to say that every now and then you do that, you realize that you did something that you didn't really intend to do, and you're sort of in an early stage where you can repair the damage. But generally, it's exciting, to look at data when they become available. Once you've done all the work, you really sort of are eager to see what's coming out. And then the bottom one sort of relates back to what I said about a Google-like search facility. So you have all these surveys, and what you can do, of course, you want to combine the data from the different ways. For example, I said, the complete HRS has been administered. So you want to combine the HRS data with something that you are doing. So you have 5 questions somewhere you want to ask, but you want to relate it to the HRS. Well, you can very easily do that, because essentially there is a shopping cart. You put a question in the shopping cart. At the end, that generates a data file, and that's your new data set across the various waves. So this is a screenshot of what the website looks like. You can click on each of these. So each of these is a survey. You can click on these, and then you get you see the questions, and then if you click on that again, you can actually also look at details of the questions. So this is an example what happens if you go a few levels deeper, and so this then for any question will just tell you the number of observations, the kind of answer that people could give, and this gives you a little table so that you have an idea of what's in the data. So this whole thing this is all based on the idea that by doing it this way, social science research becomes easier, quicker, and more effective. It's not the be-all and end-all for everything, but in many ways, I think it does make our life a little easier, and that's really in many ways the goal of what we're trying to do here.